I didn't waste a second. I walked straight into the bedroom, and there they were, locked in a kiss on our bed. But the real shock hit me when I realized this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment betrayal. No, this had been planned. Hazel got off Samuel's lap. And get this, she tried to kiss me. Samuel didn't even flinch. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't him who'd somehow waltzed into our relationship. It was me who had been invited to play the third wheel. They'd been at this for a year, and I had been blissfully ignorant. Disgusted, I stormed out of the room, practically throwing up. So, I have a rule. I never raise my hand against women. But that didn't stop me from giving Samuel a good slap in the face. After he left, I started packing my things. I didn't want to be in this house anymore. Hazel came up to me, arm outstretched. "I love you," she said. I snapped back, "You're an animal. You and your Samuel, you have nothing sacred." Then, without missing a beat, she casually told him she loved him too, and that she was hoping we could all live happily ever after. Honestly, at that moment, I started to suspect she was part of this trio she had been hinting at. But I didn't push it. I figured if I did, I'd completely lose it. She actually asked me to think it over and to call her back when I'd cooled down. That's when it hit me. Maybe I'd been way too narrow-minded before. The whole thing made me rethink my approach to women, especially the free-spirited ones. I started to appreciate the conservative types with firm principles. As for the open-minded ladies, yeah, I steer clear of them now. Hazel and I were just a typical couple of college students, head over heels in love. I was in my third year of learning the ropes of programming, while she was diving deep into the world of dentistry, getting ready to become an orthodontist. Both of us were aiming for careers that were in demand, so we figured we'd at least be set for a comfortable life. Our dreams were huge. We wanted to travel the world, maybe even settle somewhere abroad. I could work from pretty much anywhere as long as I had my laptop and an internet connection. Hazel, on the other hand, would always have her work. A good orthodontist is valued everywhere. As a future doctor, Hazel had a very laid-back, almost philosophical view on life. But it wasn't all about these big-picture plans. She treated relationships, too, as something kind of casual. "Henry," she said one day, as I finally confessed that, well, I'd been with a lot of girls before her. "I don't care about your past." She added calmly, "There are 3 people living here anyway." I nearly dropped my cup of tea in surprise. What? I thought. Is this some kind of weird joke? She shrugged. Why does it have to be a perversion? It's just another way of being together. Honestly, I was kind of stunned by her coolness. She didn't judge anyone, and in her view, the world was simple. People were the ones who complicated things with all these moral boundaries and rules. I couldn't help but admire her for that. I thought, wow, I'm lucky to be with someone so free and open-minded. So we just carried on that way, living in a cozy little apartment, getting to know each other and loving each other. About 6 months later, Hazel brought up the topic again. It was a Sunday evening. We had a cozy dinner, a bottle of wine, and a deep, heartfelt conversation about everything under the sun. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but she was persistent. This time, she made it clear that she wanted to talk about, well, relationships that aren't exactly conventional. But Samuel did this, she said, grinning. Samuel was a classmate of hers, a good friend. We'd hung out a couple of times, even went to a few soccer games together. At first, I thought he was juggling 2 girlfriends at once, but according to Hazel, it was a little more complicated. She said Samuel was part of a trio. 2 guys, 1 girl. To be honest, I was a little shaken by this. Sure, I wasn't exactly a prude, but this kind of thing wasn't sitting right with me. I couldn't look at Samuel the same way after that. He'd become some sort of cautionary tale, a guy I couldn't really respect anymore. I didn't like this whole idea of free love, or whatever they called it. When Hazel brought it up again, I wasn't laughing. I told her, in a pretty irritated tone, that the whole thing was unnatural and, frankly, immoral. I couldn't understand who in their right mind would want to share their soulmate with someone else. There's no way jealousy wouldn't explode. At first, Hazel looked a little upset, pouted a little, but then she smiled and said that I wasn't trying. Well, it hit me like a bolt out of the blue. A little later, I went to visit my parents in my hometown. For some reason, I couldn't shake the nagging concern for Hazel. I couldn't even pinpoint exactly why I was feeling this way. After all, she's been sending me passionate messages all day, probably 300 times. Seriously, I didn't doubt her love for me. But still, something was wrong. Hazel couldn't seem to avoid these conversations. I promised myself that when I got back to the city, I was going to lay it all out. No more beating around the bush. It was going to be him or me. End of story. Harsh, sure, but if this guy was messing with her, I wasn't about to let him keep his influence on her. When I landed back in town, though, Hazel didn't show up to meet me at the airport. She knew exactly when my flight was supposed to land. I felt a little hurt, but what could I do? So I grabbed a cab and headed to our apartment. I knocked on the door. No answer, even though she promised she'd take the day off from her clinic to spend time with me. I let myself in with my key and immediately heard noise coming from the bedroom. Some kind of ruckus. Then I heard a voice. It sounded exactly like Sandal's.